All right, so we're now ready to do some editing. All right, now, just before we get into stuff, number one, make sure you've got a glass of wine ready, or beer, whatever you like, but we're going to enjoy this, right? We're meant to relax into this and have fun, so we're going to make sure that we're set up to relax. So, all right, now, first thing we need to do is we've got our files sitting on our GoPro and we need to get them onto our computer. Now, what we're actually going to do is, best thing to do is actually take the SD card, the micro SD card out of the GoPro and put it directly into the computer. Much faster to copy things across that way rather than plugging the GoPro into the Mac. So I'm using a Mac. Everything I'm doing here is obviously going to be Mac, but essentially the same thing applies with PC. All right, so on the left-hand side, I have my GoPro plugged in at the back. It comes up with this SD card. On the right-hand side, I have my external hard drive. Now, on my external hard drive, I create every episode. I basically give it a folder, and then we give it a folder name I actually use the date as a structure, just so it makes it easier to find stuff later on. And then within that, if I go into this folder, we've got our media, and then I've got my GoPros over here. So I've already copied everything across. So you don't have to sit here and watch me copy stuff because that would be boring. Now, just a quick context explanation. So this video is from a quick ride that we did on the weekend, and we went for a bit of a dirt ride up into the mountains. Now, I thought this would actually be a good example because one, I just shot it and I now need to turn it into a video. So we're going to go through this whole process together. And two, I'm using multiple cameras. I've got Matt's GoPro from his helmet. I've got my GoPro from my helmet, which I had some issues with, so I'm going to cover off that as well. And then we've got a handheld GoPro that I use separately. And then I've got my 360 as well, GoPro Max. So we've got a big mix of different cameras here, which I think we're going to be able to have some fun with. Now, what I've got here on the left is what you would see on the GoPro's SD card. So if we just go back to, the root of the card, you've got these folders here. You can kind of ignore all of those except for this one, DCIM, which is fairly common on all cameras. So if you've experienced that before, you know what's there. And there's a folder in there called GoPro, funnily enough. Now I'm just going to switch to a detail view, and what I normally do here is there's a few files we want and a few we don't. So we're going to ignore the files we don't want, copy the ones we do. Now on this particular camera, as with all of my GoPros, I have ProTune's audio turned on, so there is WAV files included in here as well. What I do is just sort it by the kind, and I actually just like to have my WAV files at the top because it copies them first and I can start to play with them. Now, so what our WAV files are our audio files, MP4 is our video files, and then these ones, LRV is actually a proxy file that the GoPro creates, which is what your GoPro app, the quick app, will use when it's connecting to it over Wi-Fi, etc. It's not actually using the MP4, the video file, it's using this low resolution version of the same thing. Just means that the app can find it with a connection that's not as, when you're connecting via Wi-Fi, you don't have, it's harder to pull through a couple of gig versus, a couple of meg. Now the other one there is a thumbnail. Again, that's just used for the GoPro app. So we can ignore that because we're not going to use any of that. So we're only going to copy these across and then we'll simply move them across into our folder over here. Now, what I normally do is I just copy them across into this folder. And then once I've done that, so I just copy them across like that. Now I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to bore you with the actual copying, so I'm just going to cancel that. But I'd end up with all these files and then I separate them out and I put them into a folder called audio and a folder called video, right? So there's my two files because I'm interested in the video files on their own, but when it comes to the audio, we're going to deal with that in a slightly different way. So essentially we're going to do that for all our GoPros, move everything across, and then we're ready to start looking at them. Now, so I've done the same thing here, GoPro Hero 9. I've got my audio there and I've got my video there. Now you're probably asking what are these two? We'll go into that later, but they're effectively with this camera, I actually hooked it up so I could pick up audio from my center system, which is in the stereo file is on the right side, and I've got my lav mic on the left side. So with that, I've actually separated them out. Now I'll show you what that looks like. Now Matt's is actually, he's done a pretty standard setup with his GoPro. He's not recording the WAV files, and we're also not using anything else. So with that, he doesn't have a lav mic plugged into his camera. His camera is just bolted onto the front, you know, as it comes out of the box, which is good because that's going to give us the opportunity to look at what that looks like if you just have that alone. If you're not going to commit to the full setup with the lav mic and the helmet and all that sort of stuff, what we see in Matt's vision is what we can utilize with that. So that's good. We can actually go through that example. Now, my Max, the 360 has all these 360 files, which half of them I've already gone through and I've converted them into MP4s. We'll touch on that again in the 360 part of the course as well. With the files already copied across on the SD card, I don't delete them just yet because I've got a backup. Right now, at this point in time, I've now got 2 copies of the files, which is great, right? I've got a backup, I've got redundancy if one of these fails. With any of these files, I just like to make sure I've always got 2 files. I've always got 2 copies of the files. Now, so when I've got on my SD card, I don't delete it straight away. I keep it on there for a little bit, and reason being is that it's essentially then a backup, right? So I've got a backup. There's no point deleting it right now until I need to use the SD card again. So for the moment, I'm just going to disconnect that, and then we'll put the SD card aside, and then we know it's there, put it away in the packet, and I know it's looked after, and I've got another copy of it. Now, I then do all my backups to AWS S3 bucket. Now, for me, you have to use an FTP transfer to be able to back that up. So it's a little bit gimmicky, a little bit nerdy. I use a script. Once you got the script set up, you just have to set off the script and it'll start uploading all the files. Now, the alternative is you can use, if you're a GoPro subscriber, is you could back up all the files there, right? So you can keep them all there, and they effectively use AWS anyway. But if you're not a subscriber, then you can choose to back up the files to AWS. Now, I happen to back up all my files to AWS, so it's not just GoPro stuff, so I keep it all on AWS for that reason. But essentially, keeping an offline, keeping a version of the file somewhere that is not inside your house is a good idea, right? So won't go into too much into that. If you have room on your PC, then keep a copy on your PC and a copy on your external, right? Something like that, just as long as you've got 2 copies somewhere to ensure that if one of them fails for whatever reason, particularly external hard drives, because they can fail, then you've got a backup somewhere. In the meantime, the SD card is the backup. All our files are now sitting on our hard drive ready for us to bring into whichever video editor we're going to be using. Now, I'm going to be using DaVinci Resolve for this, as we mentioned in the intro. Of course, all of this would apply to whichever video editing suite you're using. There's not going to be much that is specific to DaVinci Resolve. And even within Premiere Pro, etc., they usually have all the same sort of stuff. So even when we start talking about multi-camera and so on, they do the same thing. It might be slightly different in the way they do it, but they still do the same thing.